Erev Tov and Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's good to be together here on this Shabbat. We're also on this Shabbat commemorating Kristallnacht, which we do here at Solel on the Friday, the Shabbat closest or sometimes relatively close to the actual date of Kristallnacht. And we'll have a couple of special readings as part of the service this evening, and we have a guest speaker that you'll hear from as well, guest interview, I should say. We're going to begin on page 171 with the words of Hannah Senesh, the poet, Eli, Eli. Eli. We continue with the lighting of the Shabbat candles. It's my pleasure to call upon Emma, who is going to lead us in one of the readings on page 20 or 21, and then light the Shabbat candles for us. And if you're joining us on the stream from home, you're invited to light your candles together with us.
Please join me at the bottom of page 20. On this day, we would see the world in a new light. On this day, we would add new spirit to our lives.
On this day, we would have peace. We would rest from desire, from gain, ambition for things.
We would raise our eyes to look beyond time and space toward eternity. Oh, may we come to see the world in a new light.
As it is written, let a new light shine upon Zion, and may it be our blessing to see its splendor.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlikner shel Shabbat.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. Please join me on page 27 with the reading in the words of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, the meaning of Shabbat. The meaning of Shabbat is to celebrate time rather than space. 6 days a week we live under the tyranny of things of space. On Shabbat we try to become attuned to holiness in time. It is a day on which we are called upon to share in what is eternal in time, to turn from the results of creation to the mystery of creation, from the world of creation to the creation of the world. And we'll turn together to the words of Lecha Dodi on page 29, where we'll do our customary verses 1, 2, 5, and 9. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat mekabla. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat mekabla. Lecha Dodi Why do we remember Kristallnacht when we have Yom HaShoah and the 27th of January as commemorative days? Well, the impact of Kristallnacht is still seen today. We see it in the form of neo-Nazi and white supremacist marches, provocations, and hate crimes, and Holocaust denial. And most importantly, this historic event was a lost opportunity for people of goodwill to join together in serious condemnation against the Nazis. Instead, the world's relatively mild response surprised Hitler and empowered him to proceed with the plan to conquer Europe. So we recall this so that others may learn from it, so that something like this may not happen to other people, and to honor all those who lost their lives on this particular day. We turn now to the words of Baruch, which is on page 36, as we rise in body or spirit to praise God. On the 9th and 10th of November 1938, simultaneously in hundreds of towns and villages in Germany and Austria, thousands of Jews were terrorized, persecuted, and victimized. This November pogrom, known alternatively as Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, also led to the desecration of over 1,200 synagogues and thousands of Jewish shops, businesses, and homes desecrated, looted, and burned. Countless individuals were attacked, abused, and beaten. The sequence of events that preceded this November terror included increasing restrictions and disenfranchisement of Jews in Germany and Austria, a wave of arrests in May and June 1938, the expulsion of Polish-born Jews from Germany to the border with Poland in October 1938, and Herschel Grynszpan's mortal attack on German diplomat Ernst von Rath in Paris on the 7th of November 1938. The Nazi Minister of Propaganda Goebbels used this as the pretext for launching the terror, although there is evidence that it had already been planned for some time. We turn together to the words of the Shema on page 40. As we rise in body or spirit, we declare our commitment to God. We declare the oneness that still is within the world, even when there are difficulties and times of strife and struggle. We are still one. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Shema Adonai Please be seated. A report regarding the abuse of Jewish children in German schools. In one school, an Aryan schoolboy is said to have been punished for his bad behavior. Instead of the usual punishments, the teacher decided to make the punishment worse. He had to sit next to a Jewish pupil for an hour. A Jewish father was advised to take his child out of school voluntarily, otherwise the teacher would see to it that he came home crying and bawling every day. In a Nuremberg girls' school, the only 2 Jewish girls in one class of the school came up to the front. They were told by the head of the school that it was scandalous they were still there because they belonged to the inferior race. He bullied the 2 children in this way so severely that they went home overcome with tears. A 4-year-old Christian child came home from kindergarten and said to his parents, "We've been told we mustn't speak to the stinking Jews anymore." We join together in the words of Michamocha on page 44 as we remember when we were enslaved in Egypt, as we remember all the times when we had been persecuted. We sing these words reminding us that it's our duty, it's our job to make sure that the world is a better place, that all those who have suffered as we have may find freedom. As you redeemed Israel and saved us from arms stronger than our own, so may you redeem all those who are still oppressed and persecuted. Baruch atah Adonai Ga'al Yisrael. We praise you, Eternal One, Redeemer of Israel. We continue at the bottom of page 45 with the words of the night prayer, the words of Hashkivenu, asking God to watch over us and to protect us as we lie down at night, that we may also awaken in the morning with renewed life and strength. Hashkivenu, Adonai Eloheinu v'shalom, v'hamidenu, shoreinu l'chaim, ufros aleinu, sukkot shlomecha, v'tavneinu, v'tavneinu. Broken glass at night, shaking each of us to the core. Broken glass during the day in plain sight after we've been shaken. Broken glass in our past, present, and in the future. When will it stop? What must we do? What must we say? The glass is a reminder, symbolic of so much more. The rain falls down to wash the broken pieces away. Even the sun stays hidden behind the clouds. And still now we ask why. How can we understand? Even in our darkest hours, we are supposed to be together. That is what we do when the past creeps back into our present. We stand together, united hand in hand. Our links cannot be broken. Beloved parents, help us to pick up the broken shards of glass, guide us in our attempts to rebuild and start building anew. As we remember our past, let us look to the future. Let our children and their children guide us along the path. Let them be the glue that holds us together. We join together on page 49 with the Chatzi Kaddish. Yikadal v'yikadash shmei Rabbah. Amen. Be'alma divrach yirtei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayecha u'v'yomecha u'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael. Yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnasei v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei v'kudusha le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tush b'chata v'nechemata damiram b'yama v'naru amen. We rise in body or spirit on page 50 for the words of the Amidah. Adonai sivatai tiftach uvi ani tehilatecha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avotinu Elohei Avraham Elohei Sarah Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Rivka Elohei Yaakov Elohei Rachel Elohei Leah Ha'el HaGadol HaGibor HaHanora El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim V'konei HaKol V'zocher Chaskei Avot V'imahot U'mevi Geulah Livneihem Le'man Shemo B'yahara Melech Ozer Moshiach U'Marim Baruch Atah Adonai Magen Avraham Ve'ezrat Sarah Atah Gibor Elam Adonai V'chayei Yaakov Atah Rav Moshiach V'chokel Chaim V'chesed V'chayei Yaakov B'rachamim Rabim Somek Nochlim Rofei Cholim U'matir Asurim U'kayim Yonatov L'Shekei Ahar Nilchamocha B'Gvurot U'midor Elach Melech B'Bituchayei U'matzmiach Yeshua V'ne'eman Atzal Yechayot Achol Baruch Atah Adonai V'chayei Achol Atah Kadosh V'Shimcha Kadosh U'Kdoshim B'chol Yom Yehallelujcha Selah Baruch Atah Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh. Please be seated. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav taught, Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tsar me'od, v'ha'ikar lo lefached klal. The whole world is a narrow bridge, but the essential thing is not to be consumed by fear. Eternal God, we look to you, our true center and the center of all things, in the triumphs and the tragedies of our lives, as well as in our successes and failures. For in you alone can we be satisfied, and in you alone creation is fulfilled. We lay our sufferings and our troubles in your hands, though we do not know their purpose. May they be used for good. All we want as Jews is to live and uphold the sanctity of life. All we want is to create peace and to create in peace, to bear witness that people are not necessarily one another's enemies, that every war is senseless, that the solution lies in compassion, and that compassion is possible. All we want is peace, and yet there is upheaval. So how can one not be sad today? How can one be in this world of ours and not despair? One day Hasidim came to inform the great Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav of renewed persecution of Jews in the Ukraine. The master listened and said nothing. Then they told him of pogroms in certain villages. Again the master listened and said nothing. The master listened and listened and listened and shook his head. I know, he whispered, I know what you want. I know you want me to shout with pain and weep in despair. I know. But I will not. You hear me? I will not. Then after a long silence, he did begin to shout louder and louder. Gewalt Yidden, Jews, for heaven's sake, do not despair. From Elie Wiesel. Please join me on the bottom of page 61. May it be your will, our God and God of our ancestors, to remove all wars and bloodshed from our world and rather to draw great and wondrous peace into the world. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Rather, all people will come to know and understand the truth, that we have not come into the world for strife and war, hatred or jealousy, anger or bloodshed. We have come into this world to know you. May you be eternally blessed. Therefore be merciful to us and fulfill for us what is written. I shall bestow peace upon the earth. You shall lie down untroubled by anyone. Let justice well up like water, and righteousness as a mighty stream. The whole earth shall be filled with the knowledge of Adonai, as the water fills the sea. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Tasim le'olam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Tasim le'olam. Ki atam melech Adonai. take a few moments now for the prayers of our own hearts. On page 66, may the one who causes peace to reign in the high heavens, let peace descend on us, on all Israel, and all the world. Oh, say shalom, shalom, Ibrahim, say shalom, aleinu, ve'yakol Yisrael, ve'yakol bnei Adam. Oh, say shalom, shalom, Ibrahim, say shalom, aleinu, ve'yakol Yisrael, ve'yakol bnei Adam. Say shalom, aleinu, ve'yakol Yisrael. Amen. Oh, say shalom, shalom, Ibrahim, say shalom, aleinu, ve'yakol Yisrael, ve'yakol bnei Adam, ve'yakol Yisrael. Please join me on page 80 for the words of Matir Asurim, the second blessing from the bottom of the page, as we continue to remember all those who still remain hostage. More than 400 days later, we pray for their safe return. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asurim, matir asurim, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asurim, matir asurim. As I think most of you are aware, Solel is fortunate to be in possession of a Holocaust scroll, a scroll that comes from the town of Horowice, which is about 50 kilometers southwest of Prague. That scroll that we read from once a year during Pesach, season of our freedom, is in the case outside in the foyer. The scroll, we have developed a liturgy honoring the Jewish community, and we remember it at this time of year and also during Yom HaShoah and Holocaust Remembrance Week. It's an integral part of the more than 100 school tours that we host here at Solel during the year, most of those led by our amazing, intrepid educator, Arlene. And we understand it's our responsibility to honor the memories of those whose lives were cut short as a result of the brutality and baseless hatred, and strive to educate the wider community on the lessons of history. So our guest this evening himself comes from Prague. I had the opportunity, the good fortune to sit down with him a couple of weeks ago to conduct an interview, which is pre-recorded because it is 2 in the morning in Prague right now. But that's a tie-in to our scroll, actually. Our guest is Rick Pinard. Rick is a historian. He's originally from Long Island, New York. He studied German and Central European Asian Studies at Bates College and at the University of Bonn in Germany. And also, later in life, he got a PhD at Charles University in Prague. He's been living in the Czech Republic since 1993. And while working on his master's degree, he kind of drifted into Holocaust studies. He is recently retired from his work there for Radio Free Europe Liberty in Prague. And he has a connection to the town of Horovici because it's very close to where he lives, and he likes the town very much. And in fact, as you'll hear at the beginning of the interview, that's part of the connection. That's how we were fortunate to meet him, and also to be connected through the Memorial Scrolls Trust Foundation. Rick, as a historian, really has taken it upon himself to learn the stories of people in the community that he lives in and in the areas surrounding it. And he particularly does that because he wants to document the lives of individual Holocaust victims for Yad Vashem, and basically not only for Yad Vashem, but anyone that is willing to listen. And he said, I think of it as a small mitzvah for the martyrs. Hitler wanted to make them disappear and be forgotten. They don't deserve that. I want them to be remembered, and that is why I do this. So you're going to see and hear the interview that I conducted with Rick Pinard, and we're very much grateful to him for taking the time and also sharing his research with us.
Hello, it's great to have you with us today. Welcome to Solel.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you as well, Rick. I understand that you had initially gotten in touch with us because of the tour scroll that we have from Horovici, and you were looking for some more information. Can you tell us a little bit about your connection to that community and what some of your research is about as well?
Well, I didn't intend to become a Holocaust researcher per se. I was writing my master's and my doctoral theses on Czech radio during the Nazi occupation. I spent most of my career at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, here in Munich first and then here in Prague. And so I'm a radio man, as it were. And so I thought that was interesting, and nobody had written about that topic per se, or the ones that had written about it had only used Czech sources, and then those had a lot of communist sort of nonsense in them, and the others had only used German sources, which were, for instance, Ansgar Diller in Germany. He was the real doyen of German radio research history. Anyway, so at the same time, we had in our family many relatives from this region, originally going back, and I sort of slipped into it. A lady at the Czech National Archives pointed out that they had this entire wealth of Prague police files, like everything from traffic fines to jail time for whatever, and they just happen to have them on virtually all or most of Prague's Holocaust victims. And there were a few that I'd come across that really interested me, so I slipped into it. And Horsowitz is, or in German it would be called Horschowitz, or sometimes even, I think in America sometimes it's pronounced simply Horowitz, but it's the original is actually Horsowitz in Czech. And all the families, you know, the famous Horowitz people throughout history, they, I guess, stem originally from this place. Anyway, we go out there a lot. There are beautiful castles. There's this fantastic Baroque palace with of the princes of Schaumburg-Hanau in Horowitz. Nearby are some much older castles from the Middle Ages, Żebrak and Tocznik, and it's all nestled in these beautiful rolling hills of central Bohemia. And you get this, you could just look out over the countryside, say from Tocznik, you look out over the beautiful countryside towards Horowitz, and you see this lovely little town down there. And so it's a place to take visitors when they come to Prague, say, and you want to get out, and just fantastic, beautiful sights nearby, beautiful landscapes. And so I was in Horowitz. I was there with my daughters when they were little, and I liked it somehow. I thought, what a sweet little town. And so I just thought, well, why not look into its Jewish history? And that's why I got in touch, because I thought you would probably know more,
Right.
know more about it. That's how I got in touch.
And it seems like you actually probably know a bit more about it than we do, but over the years we've tried to connect with other communities that have Torah scrolls from the same vicinity. So yeah,
Excellent.
Yeah, we have a little bit of connections that they have given us some of the information that we have that's on our webpage.
Oh, super.
Yeah. So it's not just our community. We think that the scrolls may not originally all have existed in that particular synagogue building, but perhaps they come from the surrounding area when things went bad and people were, trying to gather things together, and the Nazis were trying to round people up. So
that could be.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about the studies and the research that you've been doing, what you're going to speak with us about today.
Okay. Well, essentially, what I have today is just a little presentation on the situation of Czech Jews in the protectorate, the so-called protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. That was Nazi-occupied, basically Czechia. Nazi-occupied Czechia. It's a somewhat complicated geographically, and I would say protectorate, which was the name Hitler gave this sort of, I don't know what you want to call it, like Czech puppet state, but it wasn't even that. It wasn't even that independent. Like Slovakia was a German puppet state after 1939, but in Czechia, the Nazis really had all the balls in their hands from the very beginning. There was, the things became tighter and tighter as time went on. The control by the Nazis became tighter and tighter as time went on. But any nonsense that they were first broadcasting about it being an independent Czech state after Czechoslovakia was just precisely that, rubbish, nonsense. It wasn't true. They had their people everywhere. So I just wanted to sort of show a bit of the history and what the Czech Jews were up against, because it came over them really in a horrific, fast manner, with the murderous aspect of the genocide and everything in a much more condensed form than, say, the German Jews experienced. Because the German Jews had all the horror of dealing with the Nazis from 1933 on. The Czech Jews, they got it like bang as of late 1938, and by 1939 most of the escape routes were closed. So it was just this really condensed horror, really. So I thought I would go through that, just show you some aspects of the details. Most of it, of what I have, is centered around Prague, but towards the end then I'll show, to the extent I can, the what was happening in Horowitz at the time, because it was a small community out in the countryside, of course, would have different set of circumstances, but very similar to what was going on in Prague. So basically, this is, as I said before, just a brief look at the situation of Czech Jews in Czechia, in this so-called protectorate, and then specifically towards the end, Hořovice. Here we have basically the status quo ante. So this is Czechoslovakia in the borders of 1918 to 1938. You undoubtedly know that this was before that. It was a country that was Austria-Hungary. It was this entire region. And out of that, we got this Democratic Republic of Czechoslovakia. Here are the Czech lands, here is Slovakia. And here is a little bit of, now it's in Ukraine, but it was Podkarpatska Rus, as a Subcarpathian Russia, and that was a Ukrainian population. This just happens to be the radio stations in the region. Obviously, I took this from my dissertation.
Interesting.
Then in September, October 1938, you have Hitler wanting the mostly German populated border regions of the country, which were also very strongly defended. And basically the British and French caved and let him have them. Germany used to extend out much farther after the war. This area was taken away and given to Poland. But so basically you can see the Czech lands, Bohemia and Moravia, are just surrounded by Germany. And the Jewish population in those regions, having seen what was going on in the neighboring countries, largely fled. And I think at the end of say November 1938, there might have been 2,000 Jews left in the area. Unfortunately, it wasn't always enough to have been a Czechoslovak citizen, because here in the former Austro-Hungarian Empire, there was this law about domesticity, I think it's called, Zuständigkeit in German, or Příslušnost in Czech. It means like a place where you have home rights. So it's like where you're registered, and every citizen of Austria-Hungary had to have home rights in a certain town. And that town had to, if they became impoverished, had to take care of them. So it was sort of a social thing. Anyway, if you were a German-speaking Czechoslovak Jew from, say, Ústí nad Labem or Cheb, called Eger at the time in German, you weren't necessarily accepted when you tried to flee into central Czechoslovakia. There were a lot of problems. The Czechs were not very keen on having German-speaking Jews come and live with them. So a lot of people ended up sort of stuck in no man's land, unless they could, some really did manage to get into the inner country. But that was then just this little region, and then Slovakia. So you see here all these German-speaking places were taken away. And Hořovice is about halfway between Prague and Pilsen. This is a German map. So you can see that this poor country was at this point really surrounded, and really in all the defensive lines, all the fortresses and what have you were gone, and this was just the Czech flatlands basically, with even some German-speaking communities within the country. Also here in Prague, there were about 5% of the population was German-speaking. I mean, there were more that were German-speaking, but ethnically connected to Germans, so either Jews who spoke German or Gentiles who spoke German. And so, for instance, here's just a couple of people who were out in Cheb, which was Ega. This is this little town out here. And these poor people, they had a business of a high-end delicatessen foodstuffs out in Cheb. And the relatives of this gentleman here had this business for a long time. This lady's father had factories in a nearby town. and they basically had to pack what they could into a car and flee for Prague. And fortunately for them, Josef Krasa, he came from Nahoruby, which is not too far actually from Auschwitz, and so the Czech authorities had to take him in and give him maintain his Czechoslovak citizenship. But that didn't, of course, save them. Then once the Nazis came here, they were later deported to Theresienstadt and eventually murdered in Auschwitz. Stop me at any time if you have any questions.
Sure.
So suddenly I think, and this really picked up after Britain and France caved into the Nazis and the desire to leave this country, because it became very, very clear that things were not looking good. And indeed, the situation, of course, it was caused by the Nazis, the German Nazis, but you always get people in the affected country who will, carry water for them. And so there were these, bizarrely, after the failure or the destruction of Czechoslovakia, there were these people within Czechoslovak society who then, like the lawyers, the bar association, who said, oh, well, these Jews are foreigners. And so the Czechoslovak Bar Association, suspended Jewish bar licenses, so they couldn't be lawyers anymore. That was before the Nazis marched in, and it's shamefully true. And the doctors tried to do something similar, but I think they didn't manage exactly. Anyway, things are becoming bad. People want to leave, and at this point, things are looking quite difficult because the German Jews and the Austrian Jews have had some time to escape. Czechoslovaks not, and so one of the options might have been to go to the United States, but there was only a quota of like just under 3,000 people from Czechoslovakia who would be allowed into the country in 1938. So I think it was calculated that if the entire Czechoslovak quota were only given to Jews trying to flee this region, the last one who applied would have been eligible for an American visa in 1980.
Wow.
So 42 years later.
Wow.
And I looked into it, and I have to say, Rabbi, this really shocked me as an American citizen. I didn't realize how bad it was. But the American officials really put a lot of stones in the path of people trying to escape. And for instance, one thing was you had to have close relatives in the States, and they had to put up an affidavit of something like, I guess in today's money would be like $40,000. And of course, not everybody has that type of spare cash. It was only $2,400 at the time. That doesn't seem like much, but of course that was $1940, and so it's worth much, much more.
And that's a lot of money per person, I would imagine, if you're trying to feed a whole family.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it was horrific. And it had to be on a time-released over 2-year period, so like $100 a month. It was really very tough. And it seems also Canada was not very forthcoming in this regard. I saw on a website from the government of Manitoba that some high official in the Canadian government said that like none in terms of Jewish refugees, none would be too many.
Yes, that's the famous phrase.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty horrible. And apparently around 5,000 Jews altogether managed to escape to Canada from Nazi influence in the 1930s, between 1933 and 1945, and that's just so few. So I'm afraid this is a shameful thing for both of our countries, but it is what it is. So for instance, these people, the Feldblums, they were waiting to get an affidavit here in Prague with their family. They had been refugees during World War I from Galicia, which was then out in Poland, and now they were waiting in Prague, and they had a daughter in New York, and they were waiting for their affidavit, and they ended up murdered before it ever came through. Then what's another option? At the time there was mandatory Palestine, the nascent Israel, but of course in May 1939, so this is after the Nazi occupation, it was on the 15th of March, 1939, 14th and 15th of March. A couple months later, the British said, no, we don't want Jews flooding into mandatory Palestine. And so really only about 2,500 managed to get there. Here in the picture is a building, the Beit Ha'am, which was the center. It had sort of the center of the Zionist community here in Prague in the 20s and 30s. Had a famous cafe Asherman. And then, of course, during the occupation, there were many different institutions here, including this Palestine office, which was supposed to support emigration. So it's still there today. Has nice restaurants. In Loha Street, which is right downtown.
And if you were to go there today, would you know that this was Beit Ha'am, or is there any signage or anything, or does it just look like it's a building that they've reimagined?
No, I just know it. I just know it.
I'm always curious about that, whether there's landmarks in certain places.
It should be. I mean, it was an important place, and you know, so many people were connected to it during the war until they were deported. So I wish it were, but unfortunately, it has a gallery that has really nice restaurants. A couple. There was during the occupation. There was oh golly, how do we say this? There was this movement to get Jews to be segregated, and so there were restaurants that had a bit better supply of food before the deportation set in, and there was a restaurant at the back of it, run by a relative of an acquaintance, and it was a kosher restaurant for middle-class people, and so that it was an important place during the war, but of course most of that ended around 42, 43. Here's one person who was really clever, really bold. This is Oswald Holzer, the father of an acquaintance of mine, Joni Holzer-Schium. She's written some books about, based on the letters of her father, who, as soon as the Nazis came, he was demobbed. He had been in the Czechoslovak army. He was demobilized, went home, and basically within like a couple of weeks got the company Batya to send him out in the city of Shanghai in China at the time was accepting refugees for a payment of $400, which was, as I said, a lot of money, but say like $10,000 now. But that was an option. You didn't need to prove very much. You could just, you know, if you had the cash and if you had the opportunity between the invasion in March and the real setting in of limitations, people who survived by getting out, generally it was in that short, just couple of months window. Excuse me. And Oswald was, he was a doctor, and he was one of them. And that you can see his the trip he took to get to Shanghai. He later met an American missionary, a Protestant woman, and they immigrated to the United States. And like I think they got there just a couple of weeks before Pearl Harbor or something. It was Joni's books are really fascinating. If you ever want to read about this type of topic, it's really good fun.
A really interesting story. And you know, of course, there was a community of Jews that made it to Shanghai, and you don't necessarily think of Jews in China, but they were there. So
they were, and a lot of them had been there from the times of the Russian Revolution. They had fled the Russian Revolution, and in fact, there were so many. There were even like address books of them from the 30s. I mean, it was a large community. So it made sense. But of course, China was in the middle of a civil war at the time, and I think Waldeck, as he was called, I think he was just incredibly brave and just figured, okay, got to go. His parents were then murdered. They stayed behind here and they were murdered. But he was an only child, but he managed to get out anyway. Another option in some cases were the Kindertransporte by Nicholas Winton is the most famous person for doing this. There have been films about it you may have seen. This young girl, her name was Eva Borgova, she was one of them, for instance. However, this was fewer than 700 children from here. And I mean, that's, Baruch Hashem, that's a fantastic number, but still out of the thousands that were murdered, it's a drop in the bucket, just a few. And for instance, this lovely little girl, Miriam Friedmanova, she was murdered in Łódź, and her half-sister, her father survived. They were murdered at the Łódź ghetto, but her half-sister now is working on a film about the family. Also named Miriam Friedman, at Morris, and also another fascinating, incredible story, but very tragic. Some people, here's another case of a family, the Borgs. You saw the sister who was on the Kindertransport. Well, the father happened to be, in the summer of 1939, happened to be in France, selling, he was a hop merchant, for making beer.
Mm-hmm.
It's very important, from Jatets, or Satz in German, and that was part of the so-called Sudetenland. We tend to say Bohemian border region, because it's less loaded term. Anyway, Jatets, he was selling the hops harvest in 1939 in France, as he'd been doing ever since 1919 every year, and he happened to get stuck there. And his wife and son remained behind in Prague, and eventually the Vichy authorities handed him over to the Nazis, and they were all murdered around the same time, just in different concentration camps. Jarmila was sent, and Hanush was sent to Treblinka, and he was sent to Auschwitz. So of that entire family, only Eva remained. And they had houses also not too far from Auschwitz, but not in Auschwitz itself. So what's the overall, just to sort of give you the size of it. So the beginning of the invasion, there were about almost 120,000 Jews, and of which almost 30,000 managed to emigrate between 1939 and 1941. However, of course, if you emigrated to the Netherlands or to France, the chances of getting recaptured then were very, very high. And very many of these people were also murdered later, like, as you saw, the family, František Borg. I think protectorate in Czech and German Protektorat is one of the most colossal misnomers of history, because it was about everything, but protection was absolutely not part of it. It was about, oppression, murder, etc. And this is the former bank. This is in Prague, the former bank headquarters of the Peček banking empire. This was a huge banking and industrial company, and when the Nazis came in, they seized it for their headquarters for the Gestapo. And it's you can see down here, can you see the pointer when I move it?
Yes, I can, yeah.
Okay. There is on this place, there is noted that the memorial, because so many people were tortured, and not only Jews, but everybody who was arrested by the Gestapo were likely to spend some very unpleasant time here, and many didn't come out alive. This was actually only the second Gestapo headquarters in Prague, because just down the street was the law offices of Polak and Stein, so perhaps some distant relative of yours. And the Nazis initially took that building, but then they figured out, I guess they got the address wrong or something. And Emil Polak was arrested though for that day. And they moved down, but they moved down a few numbers in the street and across the street, and they took this building instead. It was bigger. And Emil Polak was saved because his wife was a Gentile, so he was sort of protected initially, and that protection lasted long enough until early 1945, and I think then he went into hiding, and he managed to survive till the end of the war. And his wife was incredible. She was an actress at the National Theater who was her name was Jarmila Kronbauerova, and she was quite famous, and she was of course forced to not perform. She was discriminated against because of her Jewish husband. She bravely, she loved performing, she loved acting, she was at the height of her career, but she refused to divorce because she must have sensed what it would mean, and she loved him. Yeah, there you can see, here's Emil, here's Jarmila Kronbauerova. And this is the original place of Polak and Stein, just a few buildings down. And then, of course, immediately upon the invasion, there was, as in Germany it had been, it was no longer allowed for there to be Jewish civil servants. So here we have Stenka Balo, who was a Czech radio announcer, and she was dismissed just a week after the invasion. And she was later a spokesperson for the ghetto commander Seidel in Theresienstadt, and she was also murdered then in May of 1944 in Auschwitz. Then the Nuremberg laws came into effect really in June 1939. And it had to do a lot with property, of course, and so this is about the confiscation of Jewish companies. Here's the law as published. You note this is one aspect of the protectorate, the so-called protectorate, that it always had to be in German first and then in Czech. Mm-hmm. In some words, they didn't allow the translation of initially because it was deemed by the Nazis as somehow, I don't know, not good for the image of a German word to be translated. There was a perfectly good Czech term for this. So what you have here is the German word with the Czech genitive case added on. And then Adolf Eichmann came to Prague that summer and set up his central office for Jewish immigration, and he confiscated this villa owned by Marek Rosenthal in the very fashionable district of Szczeszowice, and he confiscated a villa for himself just down the street. And later, my daughter's best friend from elementary school was living in a villa just next door. And I came to pick her up, and I said to the parents, "Oh, do you know you share a fence with the Eichmann villa?" And they were none too thrilled. But that's how life in Prague is. It's just, you've got history everywhere you turn. Not only from this period, obviously, but I just happen to know a little about this period. So anyway, this is the place people had to go, and they had to fill out these papers, like what you own, what are your bank accounts, how much is in them, any things that are valuable, you had to list it in these papers, and you had to pay to get this, just adding insult to injury. And then these things, the idea behind it, of course, is that if it's listed on this paper, and then it comes time for you to be deported, and the officials turn up and say, "Oh, where's?" Okay, no, that would had to be in a bank, but say, "Where's this tea service, this, where is it? And you don't have it, then the threat was, okay, then that's a serious infringement, and all the punishments were draconian for any infringement of these so-called Nazi laws.
Were people even aware at the time that they were listing all these things that they'd be called to account for them later, do you think?
Yes, it was, yeah. No,
Okay.
it was, I mean, of course it was, I mean, if you're asked to list your valuables, it's obvious that somebody has an interest in knowing that you have them, and that these people were not friends was very, very clear. So, and I know that there were, if you read the Jüdisches Nachrichtenblatt, Żydowskie Liste newspaper at the time, there are repeated announcements of, okay, in case you happen to hide your grandfather's watch, you didn't report it, this can have consequences, so you're free to you're free to register them for the next 5 days or something, but after that, so, and there were all sorts of things. Of course, people tried not to hand in valuables. I know a case of a neighbor of a friend who had a really, really good violin, and he traded it with a Czech Gentile friend, and handed in the cheaper one, and it came out, and they both got beaten, and the Jewish guy was killed. So, it was draconian. Then there are this whole ream of laws, like no visiting restaurants unless they had separate Jewish sections, no owning of radios, they had to be turned in, and it happened to be Yom Kippur, particularly on Yom Kippur, people had to carry these radios. And then eventually a curfew when the war started. This was September 1939. Also a complete lack of protection, frozen bank accounts. People could take out about 1,500 crowns a month, which that was not little, but I mean, if your rent is more, then you're sort of stuck. So, and then there was rationing, and of course, rationing. There was incredible discrimination against Jews in the rationing. So there was, if you think about it, there's already this movement to malnourish Jews before the deportation. So, and of course, it makes everything more expensive when there's rationing. There become shortages and the black market. And if you get caught in the black market, and I've seen several cases of people that was a problem. Of course, out in Hořovice, it's more out in the countryside. People may have had a bit more access if they had Gentile friends who owned farms. They may have had a bit better access to, say, vegetables and maybe some meat here and there, but there were also draconian punishments for people who shared with Jews at the time, if they were caught. It was a big problem. And there were collaborators and also Czech fascists who were watching this type of thing, or watching for it, hoping to get some advantage from the occupation authorities. There were newspapers, like the worst of them was called Ariski Boy, and that means the Aryan struggle. And it had literally a column where some member of the Czech fascists, which were, okay, admittedly, they were a very small group on the sidelines, but there were enough other people who wanted to get some advantage, and they would publish things like, I don't understand why Rabbi Polak is still allowed to live in this villa, while us poor Gentiles are, in some cold flat. And then that would be published. Or we don't understand why Mr. Novak is giving milk for Rabbi Polak's children when it's forbidden to do that for Jews. And then Mr. Novak would be, down at the Pechkarna at the Gestapo, having a tough time. So it was a horrific situation. Yeah, and then things really start to get worse throughout 1941. No apples, no sugar rations. Kids weren't even allowed to do training courses which had been, since they were kicked out of schools, a lot of people had tried to retrain as farmers or something that they could apply in, say, Israel or use in some other country, but all those courses were forbidden. No clothing rations, no sugar rations. This is today the Václav Havel Library, but when I was young it was still a post office, and during the war it was the only post office that Jews could use in all of Prague. So this means that if you were living out in Karlin, in some like district on the outskirts of town, and you had to send a letter, you had to come to this post office, which is, I don't know how big your community is, but that could be, and you're not allowed to take the tram, so that could be a walk of 2-3 hours, depending.
So it's basically just everything was closing in, making everything smaller and smaller and smaller, reducing people's lives.
Precisely.
Almost
Precisely.
nothing, yeah.
And it was called the Ghetto Without Walls. And then it literally started that people had to move out of their flats and move into the living room of some other Jewish person. So it just became worse and worse. Like at some point they confiscated lentils found in, that people had still had. And then eventually people had to wear the Magen David. And then all sorts of things were also simply they didn't receive ration coupons for, and you couldn't buy it legally without a ration coupon. And then in November 1941, then no, before that, already mid-October, there were the deportations to the Łódź ghetto in occupied Poland. And then in November 1941, the Nazis set up the ghetto at Theresienstadt, and people were sent directly there. So the ultimate numbers, if we take the entire situation, if there were about 92,000 Jews in the so-called protectorate at the beginning, of them about 78,000 were murdered. And nearly 50,000 of them were deported through Terezin, also Theresienstadt. At the end of the war, only about, just over 8,000, for instance, from Prague, out of 56,000 came back. So maybe 14.5% of the Prague Jews survived, and out in the countryside it was worse. And you can see the different categories why people survived, and some were in mixed marriages, some were in the Czechoslovak army in exile, they came back, some had managed to immigrate. And then there were the so-called submarines, as a ponorka in Czech, and those are people that lived in hiding somehow, like the author Jiří Weil, but he only did so for a few months. So in terms of Czechia's Jews, it was really a colossal percentage were murdered during the war.
Well, Rick, we really sincerely appreciate your being with us tonight and sharing all of this information. It's really a precious legacy for us to learn from and to understand, kind of, if one can really understand what happened. But to remember those folks and their stories and ensure that their lives are not forgotten. So thank you so much.
I thank you, Rabbi, and all the very best to your community.
Thank you.
So Rick has done a lot of research, much more than what he shared. This is just one of his presentations. He, as I said at the beginning, contacted us primarily because he wanted to learn more about the community that our scroll comes from. And he has promised to do a lot of research and get more information, and he'll come back at some point in the next year or so, and will share that with us, the history of the things that we haven't been able to find ourselves, because he has access to the archives right there. So that should be interesting. We're going to turn to the Aleinu, which is on page 149. And we rise as we pray for the day that the world will be one and at peace. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon ha'kol, l'ateit gedula li'otzeh b'reshit, asher sam kelkeinu li'ached et shemo, ve'gor aleinu le'amrit malchuto, v'anachnu korim, u'mishtachavim u'modim, lifnei melech malchei hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוצא הארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים עמו, ושכינתו זו בגובה מרומים. הוא אלוהינו העליון, אמת מלכנו, אפס סולתו, כך כתוב בתורתו, וידעתיו והשוות אל לבביך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחת אין אור. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. Please be seated. If worry and despondency seek our undoing, then we should think about Yizkor, remembrance, in such a way that we identify ourselves as Arevim Tovim, good guarantors, carrying on the work of our ancestors from Sinai, in that we are parents of the future generations. Then the chain does not break, and we gain the strength to carry out nobly these historical responsibilities, and to thank God sincerely that remembrance, Yizkor, has become the celebration of our soul. Those are the words of Rabbi Regina Jonas, Harav Malka Reina Bat Zev Wolf Asara, who was the first woman rabbi, born in Berlin in 1902, ordained in Germany in 1935, deported to Theresienstadt on November 6th of 1942, and then deported and murdered in Auschwitz, October 12th of 1944. So at this time, as we turn our thoughts to those who have departed this earth, we recall those, our loved ones, our neighbors and friends, and all those people whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. We recall the names of the following whose yahrzeit, the anniversary of whose death is this week. Max Marcus Hozioski, the father of Leonard Hozios and the uncle of Les, the late Dave, Esther, and Jack Stock. Saul Rowan, the father-in-law of Raina and the grandfather of Evan and Lisa. Reuben Griff, the stepfather of Harriet Kornbluth. Dorothy Berman, my aunt. Lydia Andrianov, the sister of Françoise and sister-in-law of Gary Dvorkin, the aunt of Guy, Orit, Tamar, and the great-aunt of Troy, and the aunt of Joshua, Jeremy, and Liza. Sarah Nathanson, the mother of Lila Wiersba. Sam Moskowitz, the grandfather of Daniel. Ruth Signer, the mother of Glenda Schulman and the grandmother of Holly. Betty Levine, the mother of Alan, the grandmother of Sean, Stacy, and Michael. Mamie Englander, the grandmother of Rabbi Lawrence Englander and Stuart Englander. Alyssa Farber, the grandmother of Noah Farber. Harriet Rich, the mother of Jill. Sophie Hannon, the mother of Jerry and the grandmother of Jonathan and Michael. Ethan Califf, the father of Braden and Bailey. Penny Fick, the mother of Mike and the grandmother of Ira and Eric. Tammy Juanita Brunk, the sister of Terrence Brunk. Dr. Marvin Sazant, the cousin of Arlene Botnick and Lorraine Chelsky. Dina Dennis, the grandmother of James, and Julian Harper, the father of Zachary. If you are here to observe a yard site and would like to state your relative's name, we invite you to share their name aloud at this time. We ask all who are mourning to rise first. As we say to Min hamakom tinachamu, may you find comfort in God's sheltering presence. Now as a community, we all rise to support those who are mourning and to say Kaddish for those who have no one to say it for them. Page 159. Yikadal v'yikadash shemei rabbah, be'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlik malchutei, b'chayechon v'yomechon, u'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'dalav izman kari v'yimru amen. Yehei shmei rabbam varach le'olam olamei almaya, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shmeid kudusha b'richu, le'elah min kol birchata v'shirata, kudush v'chata v'nechemata, da'amiran me'alma v'yimru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Osei shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, Amen. May the source of peace send peace to all those who mourn and comfort to all who are bereaved among us, among all our people Israel, and among all the nations and families of earth. As we say it together, Amen. Amen. Please be seated. At this time, it's my pleasure to call upon Ruth Ostrower, representing our board, to bring greetings and announcements.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. We have some thank yous to our tech volunteer, to Joel Brown, who keeps us all connected, David Grossman, who is our shamus this evening, Frank Kay, our greeter, and also to the rabbi for that very special and moving service in honor of Kristallnacht. Lots going on at Solel over the next couple of weeks. Do check the shamus and the website on a regular basis. Regular Shabbat services over the next couple of weeks. On Sunday the 17th, Beit Sefer Solel classes in the morning, followed by Monsters and Mention for the young people with Arlene, pizza, lunch, and board games. And we also are continuing the adult study class with Rabbi Englander, who is leading his course on religious Zionism from moderate to messianic. Also on the 17th, there is going to be a session at 12:30 with the rabbi, an opportunity for non-Jewish Solelniks who are looking to learn more to come and join her in a study session. And on Tuesday, we have our next Lunch and Learn, Oil Lamps and Archaeology, led by David Douglas, a Solelnik. The Talit workshops are progressing. If you're still interested in joining, reach out to Miriam Schumann via the office. And on the weekend of November 23rd and 24th, at the Saturday morning service, we will have a guest speaker from Artsa. Lee Weiser will be here to speak about Israel at a crossroads. And on Sunday, Dave Gordon takes over the kitchen to make endless numbers of latkes. They will start at 8 o'clock, and if you're interested in joining, please do so. And that also means you'll be able to start contacting the office to purchase 10 latkes for just $20. And finally, just to remind everyone that our Living Torah project does continue. Donations of all levels are welcome. We hope that everyone will be able to participate in this very special program that we have been conducting over the past couple of years. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Ruth. We're going to close with the singing of Ani Ve'ata, followed by the words of Kiddush. So please join me on page 172. And after that, we'll call upon Zach to lead us in Kiddush, leading us into the Oneg Shabbat. Ani ve'ata nishane et ha'olam. Ani ve'ata az yavo bar kulam. Amzur et zekon I invite you to now rise and body your spirit to join with Zach in the Kiddush on page 163, and we invite those joining us on the live stream to raise your own glass at home and toast l'chaim with us.
Vayhi Erev, Vayhi Boker, Yom HaShishi. Now the whole universe, sky, earth, and all their array, was completed. With the seventh day, God had ended the work of creation and rested with all work completed. Then God blessed the seventh day and called it holy, for with this day God had completed the work of creation. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher tishanu b'mitzvotav, v'ratzavanu, v'shabat kosho, v'yahava u'raso, v'yilanu, zikaro b'ma'aseh b'reshit, kihu yom tehillah, le'mikra'e kodesh, zecher l'tziyat v'Yitzrayim, kiwanu v'atata, v'yatanu kidashta, mikol olamim, v'shabbat koshecha, v'yachava u'ratzon, v'chaltanu, Baruch atah Adonai, mekadesh Hashem.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Those who are gathered here, please join us for Oneg Shabbat in the Kiddush room. Shabbat Shalom to those joining us at home.